Hello and welcome to Boring Dad Gaming, where today I'm going to be taking a look at a demo on my channel. This is, and I apologise in advance for the pronunciation of this, but it's Omen Exitio, Hunger. This is a sort of detective, spooky visual novel type thing. As I said, this is a demo, but I was recommended this by a commenter on my channel who knows the sort of things I like, and I thought it sounded pretty interesting. So it's set in, I think, 1927 I think it's in New York. It might be Brooklyn or somewhere like that. But in any case, there's a child's gone missing, and we're a reporter who is sort of investigating the case and trying to sort of help find them. And I understand there's some horror themes, sort of quite Lovecraftian themes potentially. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump in and see for ourselves. There we go, New York. Prologue, the stolen cars case. Okay, so it's not voiced. The gloomy afternoon sky has the colour of cigarette smoke, capable of making you pinch your throat with the sweet need for nicotine. The outline of a large wooden house, apparently old and dilapidated, stands in front of the windshield, completing the cheerful picture of a terrible workday. It's not that strange, really. Riker Avenue is a place forgotten by God, where bare trees and wild animals rule the roost. The people who live there usually have dirty business to hide, and the junkyard you're investigating is no exception. It seems like the editor-in-chief is very interested in this stolen car recycling business, unlike you. I like the sort of grayscale, hand-drawn style art. I think that's pretty cool. We're getting a journal, just getting some stuff loaded in. So we've got characters. Edward Thurber is my editor-in-chief at the New York Gazette, a newspaper he runs with rigour and shrewdness. Despite his inquisitive and sometimes overly affected manner, he loves art, and is the only friend I have left from my old life in Boston. He believed in my potential as an artist, and offered me a new job at the paper when my family died. We also have locations. Riker Avenue, a rough and rather isolated area of Queens where the John Mahoney Junkyard sits. It is said to be one of the most important junkyards in the city, and obviously nobody lives in this place, which looks like it could collapse at the first strong gust of wind. In terms of clues, we don't have anything yet. We also have collectibles, which we don't have yet. Carrying on. You park at a certain distance from the dilapidated house for greater caution. According to your informant within the police, there shouldn't be anyone there until Monday, but caution is never too much. You reach to the right to grab the folder containing all the information you have on the investigation, but your hand slips on the treacherous surface of the cardboard, which spills all its contents under the seat. You curse your own carelessness with several uncreative expressions, and as you collect all the fallen papers from the mat, you come across, along with some sheets from old investigations now concluded, a little black-covered booklet in your hand. It's a diary that you had kept until a few months ago, and that you had filled with disjointed thoughts and philosophical reflections helped by a few too many drinks. A rather unsuccessful project, given the unworthy end you had reserved for it, abandoned and buried under the seat as if it had never existed. Without even thinking about it, you start to leaf through the notebook with a distant look, letting the memories of the last few years cloud your vision. Okay, Saturday, 15th of May 1920. So this is our journal, isn't it? The first image that appears before you is that of a baby in swaddling clothes held in the loving arms of a woman in bed. Your heart tightens at that memory. Imprinted in your mind as if you had it right in front of your eyes, the most beautiful day of your life. In fact, of your life. You and your beloved Margaret, who until a little while ago were worried about the complications that the midwife had feared during the pregnancy, could now hold in your hands the fruit of your love. Young, unmarried, with none of your parents to support you, you had still decided to keep that little creature, which now appeared to you as the most beautiful and important thing in the universe. And, precisely because in that period the first daisies were sprouting, you had decided to call her Daisy. Okay, so we jumped ahead a little under 2 years. The drawing room shows the little door of the apartment below the one where you lived with Margaret at that time, in an old and poorly frequented alley near the cemetery, the place in Boston that you used to call your workshop. Painting was a passion for you, but not very lucrative. The few earnings came from occasional clients and the odd jobs that Margaret did. So, when a very distinguished dead man had come to your door, you thought he was lost. Instead, he was an art critic from New York. His name was Edward Thurber, and he was struck by your precise and realistic representation of the nature of things, yet pregnant with the artist's feelings. He had therefore proposed that you present yourself at the Boston Art Circle. Okay, we've got a choice here. What are we going to exhibit? Paintings of landscapes or people? Let's do landscapes. So this is a few weeks later. And so many people had been able to see your paintings in this small exhibition. You had been excited and struggled to speak, but your new friend, curating your own work with a nice glass of bourbon in his hand, had remedied that egregiously. You smiled as you thought of the little appreciation you'd received from some of them. Elliot Thurber, the younger brother of your patron, had called them so realistic as to be boring, a colourful repetition of what we can already find in any Steichen photograph. Otherwise, most had trusted the older brother's judgment, and you had begun to make a few commissions from them. As the months went by, there were always a few clients who came in and asked for a painting, and this had enabled your family to live comfortably for a few years. Okay, we've jumped ahead another couple of years. The sketch on that tear-stained wavy paper depicts the three of you together, in a moment of happiness that had just seemed to have been cruelly snatched away by fate. No one knows exactly why it had happened. The doctor had said he had warned you of the possibility, but you had preferred to ignore it. No, you had preferred to ignore it, because you couldn't bear the thought of losing Daisy, and you had behaved as if nothing was wrong. Had this perhaps made the situation worse? Yet you had never let her want for anything, and she seemed so happy. At the funeral, Margaret had not shed a tear, remaining impassive in front of the small coffin being lowered into the grave, under the gaze of a few other people. You had held her, but she had not shown any reaction, and at that precise moment you had foreseen the end of everything. Okay, about 6 months later. In the following months, Margaret had succumbed to melancholy, developing a morbid sense of faith, and often, from your study, you heard her reciting the rosary for the soul of Daisy. Your married life had never recovered, and you both became more and more estranged each day. Among the pages, you see the small wooden rosary peeking out. In those worn beads, however, your eyes still see the darkness of the bedroom. Your nose smells the pungent odour that had assaulted you when you entered, and your ears can hear that scream of despair as if your own throat were admitting it now. When you realised that your pistol, an old reminder from your time in the military, was missing from the desk drawer, it was already too late. She had decided to join your little girl. You, instead, had remained there crying for both of them. Another few weeks ahead. One sketch depicts a plump, elderly man with a bushy beard handing you a basket containing a black cat with one eye. You had just moved into your current apartment in New York. He lived next door, but was moving to a new home where he couldn't keep his cat. He'd asked you if you would be willing to take care of his loyal companion, telling you that if you fed him, he would immediately become attached to you. Well, that sounds like cats. You didn't know how much time your new job as a journalist offered by Thurber would require, or how long you would stay. But in the end, faced with that gentle little face, you gave in. And so, on the man's advice, you gave your unexpected friend a new name. We could call him Menes, like the first pharaoh who unified Egypt. I'm not going to do that, because I'm not exactly sure of the pronunciation. Pluto, like the god of the dead in classical mythology. Or Salem, as the witch city from which your family comes. So let's call the cat Salem. So we have jumped forward, about another 8 months or so. The portrait of Colin appears before you. He was the first friend you made in New York. You were doing research for an article on some smugglers who were supposed to sell a batch of gin to be sent to Chicago. Can't remember exactly when Prohibition was, but it sounds like that's probably around this time. You knew the police would intervene, and you had gone to the scene, well hidden and ready to observe the situation. But when the authorities intervened, a commotion broke out, One of the criminals started firing a machine gun, forcing the police to retreat while his accomplices secured the load. One of the officers had fallen to the ground, wounded by a bullet. The aggressor had him at gunpoint, ordering his colleagues not to play any tricks. However, you were close enough to intervene. You attacked the aggressor and threw him to the ground. It's the same day. You stopped thinking and started running. The criminal saw you coming at the last moment and threw himself at you to try and stop you. He started firing randomly, and at that moment an excruciating pain hit you in the shoulder. Shortly afterwards, you lost consciousness and collapsed on the ground. Then you succumbed to unconsciousness. When you woke up, the police officer the criminal was threatening and for whom you had intervened at the expense of your own life was in the bed next to yours. He had introduced himself as Detective Colin Wright. You had smiled and introduced yourself in turn. During those days of convalescence, since he himself had to recover from a bad wound, you had talked a lot. It was then that you realised you had found a friend in that big city. However, someone else had written the article. Okay, so we've had a little read through our background, and we can have a quick look at this, but we've basically got Colin, who we know is the friend that we made, Daisy, who was our daughter who died, and Margaret, who was our partner who died. So a lot of sadness and loss in his history. You close your eyes in the journal in unison, chasing away memories of the past with a deep sigh. You put the journal back in its place and focus on the real reason for your presence in Riker Avenue. You look out the window at the incessant, icy drizzle that has begun to water the earth. You snort and regret not having brought an umbrella. You then go back through the papers in your folder, checking that you're in the right place and summarising any information that might be useful. John Mahoney, which unfortunately I think that was Fraser's dad, wasn't it? Fraser, the actor, who was a lovely man by all accounts. John Mahoney is the classic dodgy character who dresses up stolen cars and then sells them to the highest bidder. An uninteresting and moderately dangerous item. The worst combination. Have a quick look at John Mahoney's profile. Here he is. A bad guy who launders cars between Queens and the Bronx. He started out helping bigger criminals than himself, but then managed to strike out on his own, and now the police are hot on his trail to frame him. He's got people helping him with his dirty work, and he's generally pretty careful to keep a low profile. So finding any evidence that compromises him will be very helpful to the investigation and to my research. You get out of the car and find yourself in the middle of a ghostly landscape littered with car wrecks. The forest gives way to a sort of open-air rubbish dump, in the centre of which stands the big house, the undisputed queen of all the wreckage. The force with which it stands out against the desolate sky is almost painful to the eyes, while the wind carries the mournful squeaks of rotting wood, which all in all seems to defy the weather and the cruelty of time. This is us. I suppose it's going to be my voice. Quaint indeed. You make the comment half-mouthed and sarcastically, warding off the need to smoke a cigarette to relieve your nervousness. Maybe I should attempt a Boston accent. Quaint indeed. No, that was not... No. Quaint indeed. Quaint indeed. I don't know. I don't do American accents particularly well. Compared to Manhattan, this place is incredibly alien. It seems so far away from civilization, but you know you wouldn't have to go that far to reach the sea with its harbours and ships. Searching for clues, you pass the tin cemetery and find yourself on one side of the house, your watchful gaze gliding from side to side, hoping to uncover some information that will end your investigation as soon as possible. Okay, so now we have more of a sort of more traditional point-and-click style interface, or like a hidden object game. I've played a few of those in my time. We have to find evidence for stolen cars, so let's just click on stuff. It seems that someone has been burning some rubbish here. I briefly considered whether to try the Bostonian accent again, but I decided not to. I can't reach the bottom of the barrel. If only I could. Whoops. Well, I'd say I had my fair share of exercise for today. Now let's see what we have here. Burnt fabric. They look like clothes. Do they burn them to keep warm? No, it's winter, but it's not that cold. There must be something underneath. Just keep looking. Right, so I think I guess we're done with that. What's this? What the F? What's a doll doing on a branch? I'm not aware that Mahoney has any children. About the little outhouse here. The bolt on the door is completely corroded. You must find out what they're hiding inside. Kick it? No way. But the cops make it look so easy. I need to find something heavy enough to help me break the bolt. Okay. Wonder, is there a button to sort of highlight interactable stuff? Just pressing various keys. There's a pot of paint there. Can of black paint. Well, I wouldn't repaint the living room walls with it. Crawl space underneath the house. Ah, leaves. What's this? The earth is loose here, as if someone has buried something. Some baby shoes? I have a bad feeling there's more to this place than just recycled car traffic. We do have a car. Bucket of black paint, a black Chrysler. It's not as if they went to much trouble to hide the evidence. I always thought I was not sophisticated enough for a Chrysler. Stop beeping it. What about the windscreen? Alright. Okay, well, we've parked the horn probably enough to be discovered if there's anyone home. Oh, there's a rock. Well, it's a large stone. I don't think it stands much of a chance against a rifle, but it's certainly better than my knuckles. And we're going to use that on the bolt. It takes a well-struck blow. Perfect! Certainly more useful here than on Mahoney's head, and less illegal. Okay, we've got some number plates. I would say that these plates are not here for collecting. I have what I need to close this damn investigation. What else do we have? Jugs full of gasoline. Some of them are ready to indulge in pyromania to sweep the dust under the carpet. Machete. Butcher's cleaver. Who knows what that poor ladder did to Mahoney to deserve this? What about the ladder? What about these bottles? I'm curious if this is Mahoney's private stash or if he's reselling bottles at a premium. Wagon wheel. Wonder if they paint the horses too. Could have used that outside. Meat hook thing out there. It's less dusted than all the other junk around here. It's probably been used recently. I think that's probably it for here. I mean, we got what we needed. So we continue? Well, it seems like there's nothing left to do here. As you make your way through the undergrowth, a sudden noise catches your attention. It sounds like a sort of heavy squeaking, but it lasts barely a moment. It came from the house, you're sure of that. So there is someone? Was the information you were given wrong? You can feel the adrenaline pumping through your veins and your investigative spirit rising. This could be the perfect opportunity to catch John Mahoney or one of his henchmen red-handed, although such a gamble might mean playing heads or tails with the possibility of having a gun pointed at you. A more tempting prospect than returning to the newsroom with nothing more than a pile of forged license plates. You strain your ears to hear other sounds, but silence hangs over the dump and the shack. So, following your desire for knowledge, you approach the dilapidated hovel. Probably makes sense to peer through the window first. You walk around the house looking for a window from which you can get a good view. It will be harder to see anything, but at least you will be in a safe position. Walking very loudly. Some of the windows are obscured by peeling shutters. Others look out onto completely empty rooms. In one, you can see a mouldy sofa and a rickety table with some rubbish on it, but nothing else. Finally, there is a small window at the back. It's glass cracked. I was going to say it's grass clacked, but it's glass cracked, but clean enough to peer inside. On the other side of the glass, you see a small room full of piles of junk. The first thing you notice, illuminated by the only beam of light that enters the room, It is some sort of overalls, crumpled and abandoned on the floor. Ooh, that looks like a person, like a child, and that's a knife. Your gaze continues to follow the bright blade, chasing across the wooden floor until it crosses the silhouette of a child. You blink and sharpen your gaze, shocked by the bizarre vision you see through the encrusted glass, but it doesn't change. It still presents the same image, this child embedded in the stark shadows of the shack. The first thing you can think of is to make sure the baby is okay, but your eyes cannot help but debunk all the lies that you are trying to tell yourself. The baby is completely naked, curled up in an unnatural position. And there is blood. Lots of blood. You squint and back away for a moment. What kind of place did Thurber send you to? It was only supposed to be the lair of a car thief and not the scene of a nightmare. You're still trying to process the image of the child cowering in the reddish puddle when the door to the room begins to open, forcing you to shift your gaze to the figure emerging from the dark doorway. That's not a human being. It looks about the size of a man, but the resemblance to humanity ends with this tragic realization. Its skin is whitish and wrinkled like cloths left to soak in water too long. Dry rolls of dermis piled on top of each other, hanging disgustingly in small, spongy pyramids. A strange rhythmic noise leads you to the lower limbs of the beast, slender and thin, culminating in the hooves of a horse. The hands are inhabited by thread-like sharp claws, and the snout is a circular cavern lined with fangs bathed in a viscous slime. You don't know how to interpret what you see. Perhaps you're going mad, or perhaps the stress of recent times is playing tricks on you. You still can't wrap your head around it as you watch the creature leap at its inert victim and begin to ravage the wretched remains of the child with greedy eagerness. But then, the creature suddenly freezes, sniffing the air for a moment. With exasperating slowness, it turns its snout towards the window and swallows a piece of meat with a disgusted twitch of its round jaw. Jeez. The monster walks at a slow, cadenced pace towards the window, bringing the wrinkled lump of blood and skin closer to your face. It has no eyes, but you can feel it staring at you. Your body reacts suddenly and instinctively, while your mind is still caught up in the horror you've just witnessed. You sprint off the porch and start running without looking back, barely stopping yourself from screaming at the top of your lungs, combining the sound of your terror with the sound of shattering glass and a scream that does not associate the beast behind you with any creature of the animal kingdom. Your muscles seem to remember where you parked, and soon you're in the driver's seat, turning the key with sweaty, trembling hands. Your vision is so blurred that you have to try a couple of times before you succeed, each time with increasing breathlessness, fearing that the creature will charge at the car. On the third desperate attempt, the keys find their place, and the engine starts to roar with a sound that seems so damn reassuring at the moment. You make a dangerous U-turn, skid brutally, and find yourself imagining this running thing trying to grind the few meters separating its giant claws from your body. You don't have to wait for the scene to really dawn on you. Your foot presses down hard on the accelerator, and you can almost hear his jaw drop as your trusty car speeds away from Riker Avenue. Only a few miles from the junkyard house, you resume breathing with a semblance of normality. It's as if your heart won't stop beating wildly. It's only now that you realize you're probably in danger of having a heart attack. You survived, and that is the most important thing. But the memory of what you saw is imprinted on your pupils, an image that will never go away. You clutch the steering wheel with your bloodless hands, occasionally letting out audible gasps, trying to relieve the tension that still pervades you, but no avail. Your shirt is drenched in sweat, and yet you are shaken by cold shivers as if you had a fever. The first time you manage to take a deep breath is when the rain begins to pound the windows of your car with the force of an unusual summer downpour. At that moment you see in the distance, like an impressionist painting interrupted by the storm, the island of Manhattan, so reassuring with its lights cutting through the surrounding darkness. Every now and then you instinctively check your rear-view mirror, terrified at the thought of this absurd creature following you. You know it is completely irrational, but your brain is still reeling from what you have witnessed. Monsters don't exist, you tell yourself, except in books and in the beliefs of the superstitious and the mad. But no costume could ever so perfectly simulate what you had seen. It was too natural to be an artifice. And the blood, all that blood, that too, like the child's body, looked so damn real. You're not even sure if the images flashing before your eyes are the ones you witnessed, or if they're the product of your own distraught mind. Ugh. What haunts you in the midst of this chaos of emotions is that you did nothing for this child. Was he really dead? Or could he have been saved? Could you have saved him from the monster's clutches? Would it have been worth facing that creature, if only to die a hero? You can give yourself none of these answers, and the lump that forms in your throat sweeps away all but one thought. You have abandoned a child to the cruelest of fates. Again. You cross the bridge that leads to Manhattan Island, and you cannot help but admire the majestic skyscrapers that greeted you in the distance. The luminaria of this big city will help you chase away the tormenting visions of the hovel as you head towards the dizzying streets of New York. There is a certain comfort in that. There are no monsters here, just busy men, probably fathers eager to get home to their wives and children. And so your thoughts return to the naked form of the child. You pull over to the side of the road in a quiet place before resting your forehead on the handlebars. Handlebars? Steering wheel, I'd have thought. Handlebars are on a bike. Take a new series of deep breaths and try to regain full control of your body. How the hell is that even possible? You want to ask yourself what you have done wrong to deserve this experience. There are too many valid answers crowding your mind, so much so that your throat tightens in a deadly grip as your eyes glaze over with tears. You cannot do this alone. You don't know how many people in Manhattan. You don't know many people in Manhattan, but you have a few trusted friends. You need to talk to someone before your head explodes and you go mad. Okay, so we've got Colin or Thurber. I think it's worth looking at their profiles and try to determine who might be more receptive. So Colin, the first and only friend I made in New York. I saved his life during a robbery I was supposed to be a bystander to, and we've been close ever since. We also work together on a professional level. He gives me some insight into police cases, and I do the same for the paper's investigations. But he's always afraid that his superiors might find out, so he is obsessed with discretion. Whereas Thurber, despite his inquisitive and sometimes overly affected manner, loves art. I'm tempted to go to Thurber. Someone with an artistic temperament may be more likely to believe something outlandish, whereas the policeman, professional, based in logic. That's my thinking on that one. Thurber, your editor-in-chief, is still in the newsroom. Talking to someone like him, so straightforward and rational, might help you make sense of what you witnessed. Okay, so he's straightforward and rational. Alright, what about Colin then? Colin probably wouldn't believe it. Alright, let's stick with our plan and go to Thurber. Act 1. Cities of Secrets and Shadows. You leave the early February darkness to enter the editorial office of the newspaper where you've worked for a few years, the New York Gazette. You're greeted by those noises that you have come to know very well since they now represent your daily routine. The hubbub of colleagues, the rustling of paper and the incessant ticking of typewriters. The people you pass either greet you politely or simply ignore you. You don't have any particular problems with any of them, but you know what they say about you. An unknown guy who in a short time has signed an article under his own name, practically without having to do any work. And that's because you're the editor-in-chief's favourite. I used to be a journalist in a newspaper, and I can tell you that if you get a byline like that, yeah, there's an element of jealousy in the room. Not that this is not true, but it is equally true that none of them know exactly why you're in that position. You go to Thurber's office and knock. On the other side of the door, you hear your friend and mentor's voice hurriedly inviting you in, and when you open the door, you find him on the phone in a rather excited conversation. You don't know what they're talking about, but you can bet it's about an important upcoming art exhibition, or a young debutante painter with a lot of potential. Memories overlap in your mind, but you know you're not there to dwell on painful memories, and as soon as the editor-in-chief hangs up and waves you over with a sad smile, you sit down in the chair in front of him and collect your thoughts on what you will have to find the courage to tell him. Thurber. Just a second, Richard. I'll write down a few things and be right back. You have no idea of the incompetence I have to deal with. Your gaze falls on the papers scattered on the desk, and you immediately notice what appears to be a flyer for a missing person. A child, to be precise. For a moment your heart skips a beat, but then you calm down. The child in the portrait looks very small indeed, 1 or 2 years old at most. Certainly not the same one you saw being torn apart by the monster. But as soon as you start reading the writing on the paper, your eyes widen. Among the various characteristics of the child on the paper, his age stands out. 4 years old. The photograph is obviously old. Today, the child must be older, and this knowledge weighs heavily on your mind as you try to reconstruct the features of that defenceless little body, abandoned in a pool of blood on the smiling drawing of the child on the poster. You try to convince yourself that it is a coincidence. After all, there are many children who disappear every day in New York. Children of illegal immigrants, children abandoned by their own mothers, or unwitting victims of a settling of scores. And this child was from Brooklyn, a long way from the old shack on Riker Avenue. And yet, despite your best efforts, you can't shake the thought that this couldn't have been just a coincidence. You can't stop staring at the picture, even as your hands instinctively reach for the pack of cigarettes in your pocket, driven by the need to get rid of all this stress. It is Thurber's voice that awakens you, emerging from the cloud of smoke that has just escaped your lips, asking if you have seen anything of interest on Riker Avenue. Or so you understand. Yes, I found the fake plates in a shed on Riker Avenue. Just notify the police, and you'll finally get that exclusive you wanted. I mean, there'll be evidence of a death, won't there? So let's say there was a child killed in front of me. Thurber leans back in his chair as if pondering what you've just said. That is a very serious accusation, Richard. Are you saying that you found the body of a child in Mahoney's hideout? He glances at the flyer you were looking at. Ah, I get it. You think it might be the one who just disappeared. If that's the case, we should be the first to report it after alerting the police. Although, I admit I can't think of a single reason why a fence would kidnap and kill the child of a non-wealthy couple. I doubt it is some kind of settling of scores. The coldness of your editor-in-chief is sometimes truly shocking. Nothing seems to upset him, not even the hypothesis of infanticide. On the other hand, he has been doing this job for so many years, and it is partly because of his cynical realism that you have decided to confide in him. Even though you're sure that you would be able to shake that resolute expression if you could show him the horrors that your eyes have just witnessed. Let's try mentioning it to him. I believe the murderer is not a regular human being. Thurber looks at you, raising his eyebrows and tightening his lips. Strange and curious at the same time. He's known you for a long time, and knows that you don't mince your words. After all, it was your ability to, what was it he said at the Boston Art Circle? Investigate the true nature of things. You extinguish your cigarette in the ashtray on your desk, look the chief editor straight in the face, and gather with both hands all the courage you have left after this absurd day. There was someone on Riker Avenue. In fact, something. Strange beast with wrinkled skin, with claws and fangs, and that stood on 2 legs. I saw it mauling a defenceless child. I think it was the same age as this William Gaffney. I fear he may be the victim. It was... oh, God, I can't even describe it. Your mentor's face remains impassive, but you know him well enough to know that his brain is already processing a response to your statement. He leans back in his chair and takes a deep breath. I can imagine. I don't know much about zoology, but from what you tell me, I think it might be a black bear suffering from mange. Yes. This is a disease that causes hair loss and makes predators quite aggressive. That would explain why it was so close to civilization. If I'm not mistaken, there was a similar case in Staten Island about 3 years ago. So maybe it's the same beast. But first, you'd have to find out if the kid you saw really was Gaffney, or... No, it was not a bear, I'm sure of that. It was too strange a beast. It had a kind of sucking mouth full of teeth and hooves for feet. There was no consistency in this creature. I know it sounds crazy, but believe me, if you'd seen what I saw today... Thurber's face frowns, and an icy air seems to descend on the room, more so than outside. It is a feeling you know well, that of your mentor scrutinizing you with the eye of an expert journalist, nay, an inquisitor. It is almost as if, behind those glasses, he can probe your soul and understand the true motivations behind your words. An ability you've always found a little disconcerting, but which, in this case, you hope will only confirm your sincerity in telling this absurd story. What you describe, Richard, sounds like a monster. And you know as well as I do that monsters don't exist. Just like nightmares, witches, Sabbaths, and the devil. They're all characters for cheap ghost stories, the kind that sell for a penny. But in the real world, real monsters walk around disguised as people. Like my wife. He finally blurts it out, trying to play it down, then he comes back and stares at you with a slightly worried expression. They look more like hallucinations to me. Maybe you ate something that was bad for you, or you need to rest. I'm fine. You no longer trust my sense of observation. This is not the first time you've confronted your boss in such a direct manner, and you know you can afford to do so, because before being your employer, he was also your friend. And you are counting on his understanding, as well as his pride. For a moment you can see him completely still, like a snake waiting to strike its deadly bite into unsuspecting prey. But then he relaxes his shoulders slightly. In fact, I still trust you. I know your abilities don't waver that easily. Just as I believe that you really did see something in that hovel in Queens, no matter how much what you say defies logic. I suppose it's still a mystery that needs some light shed on it, especially if infanticide is involved, and if the baby you say you saw really did look like Gaffney. I'm old enough to know that most of these stories lead to holes in the water, but, He pauses for a moment, then he sighs, perhaps in a fit of paternal resignation. Well, I suppose I should be more flexible. After all, we live in crazy times, with a war behind us that still makes me cringe in my sleep, and new forms of communication and art that my father could never have dreamed of. Like the Art Nouveau style. Your provocation falls on deaf ears as it is completely inappropriate. Thurber, however, continues to stare at you and decides to gloss over your unfortunate joke with a collective raise of eyebrows and shoulders. Well, since you don't lack humour, and I have most of my experienced men on the Shanghai landing, and that Coolidge idea of having a meeting in Genoa, how about you take over this investigation? Your boss's office, which had always given you a sense of security, quickly turned into a suffocating prison as the faint smile you had painted on your lips turned into an expression of dismay and terror. The idea of taking over the Gaffney investigation hadn't even crossed your mind, especially given the possible involvement of this thing. Millions of excuses crowd into your head, a hurricane of justifications from which you must choose to avoid the terrible task Thurber is about to entrust to you. Richard? You blink and realize that you've spent the last few moments of the conversation staring into space, prey to cold sweats and images in your head. The improvement in quality, remember it? How to forget? Thurber has done nothing but talk to you over the past few months, trying to assign you increasingly complex and difficult articles. You've never had the courage to tell him that journalism will never be a catalyst in your life the way it is in his, that you prefer a more stealthy approach, avoiding the most difficult cases whenever possible. You have the makings of more, Richard. To turn the page, maybe the first page. If you really saw that child being killed by someone or something, this is your big chance. The chance to show all those idiots in the other room what you're made of. As he speaks, Thurber opens a desk drawer and pulls out a folder. He takes the flyer you were just looking at, picks up a few more sheets of paper and slides them into it. Then, handling his black fountain pen with extreme precision, he writes Gaffney Inquiry on it, almost as if it were written in fancy fonts. He hands it to you. As you can see, we don't know much yet. The Gaffneys live in a block of flats at 99 and 15th Street, and said their son disappeared at around 5:30 p.m. yesterday. No witnesses, except for another child of the same age, the neighbour's son, and no distinguishing features other than a small scar on his lip. Having said that, he doesn't add anything else, but goes back to the notes he made when you arrived, puts a sheet of paper into his brand new typewriter, and begins to pound the keys in a cadenced, almost harmonious way. You know this is his way of inviting you out when he no longer feels like talking. So you get up to leave, but just as you cross the threshold, his voice reaches you. See you in the usual place in half an hour, striped and spotted. You give him a half smile, without him being able to see you, and leave the office with an inquiry in your hand that, if nothing else, can help you make sense of everything that has happened to you on this absurd and terrible day. As you leave the newsroom to walk back to your car, a gust of icy air hits you hard. Although this winter is turning out to be surprisingly mild, the night is still very cold, and you fear that going home so soon will leave you with the nightmares of that day. You really need to distract yourself, if only to ease the tension, and you can't ignore an order from your editor-in-chief. So you cross Times Square, which, if New York's eternal lights weren't enough to make the night less frightening, is a veritable ode to progress. Huge lights blaze everywhere, and giant billboards make everyone who passes under them feel tiny. You pause for a moment to contemplate this view, to which you are not yet accustomed, even though you happen to pass it with some frequency. For at the moment you think about how you could reproduce these magnificent, iridescent colours on canvas, about the perspectives to be taken into account, and another gust of cold makes you wince and shake your head. All that is gone forever, and nothing can bring it back. The person to whom these thoughts belonged was a naive Richard, who was under the illusion that everything would be all right, and who didn't realise until it was too late. A poor idiot who will never deserve to be exhumed. You feel panic overtaking you. For a long moment you wonder what you're doing there in this chaotic city, playing the role of someone you never thought you'd be, and maybe don't even like. It was better than being overwhelmed by everything that came before, you tell yourself. But now, after seeing what is imprinted in your eyes today, you're not even sure of that anymore, and you don't really know where this life wants to take you. If there is a destination at all, and not a void as deep and dark as the abyss that swallowed Margaret, and... You bite your lip. The image of a little girl standing between you and your thoughts, smiling innocently as she hands you a bouquet of daisies. But this sweet memory is no relief, and in fact the guilt is seeping into your bones, crushing them, as if to break them in two. What were you thinking when you asked Thurber to take over this investigation? I don't think we did we? So he gave it to us, we didn't ask for it. Wasn't it enough to let him know what you'd seen and then return to peace and anonymity? Instead, there you were. But, yeah, we didn't do this. It was one of the options, but we didn't take that path. Instead, there you were, bargaining with the editor to put you on the trail of the missing Billy Gaffney, as if that would somehow change your past. But your friend is right. Nothing can bring back what you've lost, and no one will look down and nod at your implicit and desperate attempt to make up for your shortcomings. While you're lost in these frustrating thoughts, you see a little girl running to her mother in tears because the candy she was holding has just fallen to the ground. The woman picks her up and smiles to comfort her, and you can't help but smile back. Maybe it was worth the risk, you think. You wrap yourself in your coat and walk down the street, leaving the glitter of Times Square behind you to slip into a dark alley. I think we're going to be at a speakeasy. If there is one thing that Prohibition did to America, it was to encourage drinking like never before in history. Probably, you think, because of that subtle aftertaste of taboo that makes every alcoholic drink taste so much spicier. You've never been a heavy drinker, but you've been to places like the one you're about to enter. Or rather, places like it, but definitely less elegant. Underground bars run by unsavoury characters, and with an even more unsavoury clientele. After all, you certainly weren't part of high society in Boston. But when Thurber invited you to the art club for the first time, to show your paintings to his colleagues, well, it was the beginning of your career, as short-lived as it was. The wind is picking up. You know you should be waiting for your editor right there, outside that insignificant wooden door at the back of some random shop on 123rd Street. But you think it's wiser to go in to avoid any trouble. You knock, but no one answers. You insist, this time with some vigour, and immediately the peephole snaps open. The crucified eyes of a man turn towards you, squinting as if you disturbed him in something very important.
Code word.
Striped and spotted.
You're in the wrong place. Get out of the way.
With that, he violently closes the peephole, leaving you wide-eyed under a sky that is once again threatening to rain. Interesting. Maybe it was tiger skin and leopard skin, striped and spotted. You have no time to react when Thurber appears next to you and without saying a word knocks in his turn. The scene repeats itself with an even rougher and more annoyed voice from the energetic man on the other side. However, your friend seems unwilling to be intimidated by an unfriendly bouncer. Yesterday was the second Friday of the month, son. Change your password. Have you forgotten it? And the new one, as my friend rightly said, is striped and spotted. The old one was black, grey and white. But if you're not convinced, I invite you to ask the mistress directly. For a moment, everything seems to stop, and there is an awkward silence on the other side of the door. Then the door opens and you can finally enter, immediately hit by the music and the smell of smoke wafting from the end of the corridor that has just welcomed you. Thurber turns for a moment and stares at the bouncer, a tall man of almost 2 meters, who seems to fit very snugly into the fancy clothes he has been given to do his job. Nice monkey suit. That should be suit, not suite. Are you new? When did your shift start? He makes himself small with shame, as much as such an energetic man can, and mumbles something about being new and starting soon after the first customers of the evening arrive. Then thank me, otherwise you would have left everyone out tonight. Not exactly a brilliant start to your career, would you say? Anyway, is the lady in? The man nods his head and waves for them to continue. The main hall opens up before you, softly lit. It's still early in the evening, so there are only a few couples chatting at the tables, and a small orchestra on the stage playing a song you don't know, but which your editor-in-chief will surely be able to tell you all about. You approach the bar, as you always do when you meet there. The barman, a middle-aged Italian with a large dark moustache, greets you with a nod and a friendly smile, even though he looks more like a grim peasant from the Mediterranean scrub. You turn to your editor-in-chief, waiting for him to speak first as usual, but he seems quieter than usual. I'll leave you to it tonight. We need to celebrate your new investigation, don't we? Besides, you know my taste. You sigh. You know that being so condescending is his way of being nice, a considerable effort for someone who always wants to be in control. He's certainly not doing it to celebrate, but because he's seen you upset. And, in any case, it is always his fault, because in the current state of your finances, ordering a drink would require some sacrifice on you. Well, he likes a bourbon, doesn't he? You take your glasses and sit down at a table very close to where the orchestra is playing. Thurber looks at his glass with an air of satisfaction. Ah, truly excellent choice, Richard. Aren't you already inebriated by its warm, penetrating scent? It is reminiscent of the pungency of tobacco, but with a note that can only come from an aging in oak casks. I have to be honest, I am surprised every time. I've always found the creation of bourbon to be an almost alchemical process. Several minutes pass in which you chat about this and that without getting to the heart of the matter you have just discussed in the newsroom. You don't mention it, and in the end it's the editor-in-chief himself who reminds you not to be late. You have to go to the Gaffneys for an interview the next morning. Other newspapers are already on the story, and he wants to get it out as soon as possible. You also feel that you are already late, but you say nothing. As you listen to him and absent-mindedly observe the people around you sipping their drinks, you see a very elegant woman with a strong bearing walk past between the tables, accompanied by a couple of seemingly unremarkable men. And of course, as she almost always does, she stops in front of you, flashes a friendly smile, and opens her arms in an almost theatrical manner. "What a pleasure to have two of our most loyal customers back so soon." Thurber smiles again and stands up. You immediately imitate him when you see him kissing the owner of the club, an Italian woman who is probably one of his oldest and most reliable contacts. "Louisa, my dear, the pleasure is ours. Oh, and don't be too surprised. The best drinks in New York are here." It's not the first time you've seen this scene, which is almost a ritual, an exchange of pleasantries concealing a very close relationship of opportunity built up over the years. Of course, you also have an informant in the police, Colin Wright, but you see yourself first as his friend and then as a collaborator. Whereas for the two of you, everything seems to be done for pure personal gain masquerading as friendship. Yes, it must be because we don't make them in radiators or bathtubs." "Well, that's an understatement. I don't want to get syphilis through my mouth." Come to think of it, you can't blame Thurber. A woman running a speakeasy is bound to have to deal with smuggling and underworld circles, so going beyond the formalities can be dangerous, and the two gallows pendants at her side are proof of that. As they chat, you resign yourself and return to your glass. It's probably not the polite thing to do, but you don't really feel like listening to their conversation. She's now talking about how her husband is planning to move the whole family from Bari, Italy, to New York, except for her eldest son, Frank. In short, you know it's going to be a long haul. Suddenly, the music of the orchestra is overpowered by singing coming from some tables near you. Some customers dressed as common labourers are singing a folk song that you cannot recognise. One of them, a boy little younger than you and looking scruffy, climbs onto the table and begins to lead the spontaneous chorus. "I never understood how he knew so many Irish songs." The lady's comment leaves you rather indifferent, and indeed you begin to find the situation pleasant. For a moment you feel like you're back in Boston, walking around Fort Hill with your family, the air filled with that kind of music on Sundays. It doesn't matter how hard you try not to think about it, because your former life will continue to haunt you in various forms, and you're just about to chase this melancholy away as usual when the woman's wince makes you turn towards her. She has a hand covering her mouth and her eyes are wide open. You hadn't noticed before, but there was a child of about 6 with the men. The man standing on the table has picked him up and thrown him into the air, catching him on the fly without stopping to sing. Maybe without stopping singing? The little boy laughs in amusement and tries to join in. None of the bystanders seem to be disturbed by the scene, except the lady of the house, and you. You realise that the danger is real, and in your mind there are many ways in which the child could be injured or worse. And so, without realising it, you sprint to your feet and take great strides towards the table. "Hey, you're upsetting the lady." He gives you a sideways glance, grabs the baby, well, it's not a baby, it's a 6-year-old, and holds it to his chest. Maybe he didn't understand what you were saying to him and he's deciding whether to ignore you or get up and beat the crap out of you. Although he shows a very good sense of balance, he must still be quite drunk. Then he looks at the table you came from. You don't know exactly what it was that almost made him stop, whether it was your admonition, the woman's worried posture, or the lightning-fast gaze of your editor-in-chief. But the fact is that he put the child down on the table in a flash. The little one continues to sing the song at the top of his lungs, even though the chorus has stopped, and asks the other to pick him up and let him fly, but he shakes his head. "Your mum's worried, Joe. Go back to her." He reluctantly obeys and walks sullenly towards the woman, who clutches him, not quite sure whether to embrace him or spank him. You smile at the sight, and then you feel a hand on your shoulder, and the boy's alcoholic breath is imprinted on your face, creating an obvious movement of annoyance that he seems to ignore. "Hey man, thanks. I didn't realise the situation and, well, I could have gotten into a lot of trouble, you know. I want to keep working for the lady, so you saved my ass, really.
Want something to drink? On me.
You smile back, but decline the invitation. Thank you, but I was just thinking of going home. It's been a long day and I just really want to eat and go to bed.
Okay. I get that someone as good as you don't want to mix with people like me, but if you happen to come around, I'm often there, just to pay you back. Well, I guess I better go get mine from the mistress and apologise for this huge mess. My name's Ray Rogers, by the way.
Richard Pickman, nice to meet you. Having said that, you see him walking towards the woman with the child, and immediately the two bodyguards flank him and lead him to the back of the club. You imagine he's in for a very bad quarter of an hour. You approach Thurber and whisper to him that you'll be waiting for him outside when he's finished talking. You've had too much excitement for one evening, and now you feel the need to go home. As expected, it started raining again. A few minutes later, Thurber catches up with you, opens his umbrella as soon as he gets outside, and invites you to shelter from the water with him. He says nothing, but it is obvious that he wants to lead you back to the car. Who was this guy anyway? Does he work for your contact?
He calls himself Ray Rogers and says he's from Pennsylvania. I know he's been in New York for almost 3 years, but I don't know what he did before that. He's not a very interesting character, the classic expensive henchman who does a little bit of everything.
A hothead, judging by his behaviour.
Yes, but it seems that Louisa's son likes him very much. Maybe that's why she hasn't thrown him out yet, despite his untrustworthiness.
You walk back to your car. You greet your editor-in-chief and assure him that, yes, you will have a good dinner and then go straight to bed for the rest of the day. You often find his suffocating manner annoying, but that evening you welcome a little paternalism. I'll see you at the office tomorrow, and thanks for this evening. You're finally home. It seems unreal that you finally reached your apartment at the end of such a crazy and dangerous day. Your one-bedroom apartment is far from luxurious, and in some ways you've never really felt it belongs to you. You've lived there for a few years now, but it's as if it's something temporary until you can go back to Boston or find a new job and a new life somewhere else. You have no idea. This thought grips you every time you cross the threshold, but you can find no peace for this torment. The only touches of you are the art books carefully arranged on the wall shelf and a small painting of you with Margaret hanging in the bedroom. Even that only weighs on your heart. You will never get used to how much your life has changed in such a short time, and how much pain it has caused you. Maybe you should just throw the picture away, but you can't. With an automatic, almost ritualistic gesture, you fill a glass of water left on the sink and pour it into the vase of daisies you keep on your desk during the day. You watch the flowers slowly wilt. Their beautiful white petals are beginning to show the brown spots that herald their fading. You don't have time to lose yourself in the melancholy that grips your heart each time you return, because as soon as you put your things on your desk, you feel something rubbing against your legs, making you start. With all that has happened to you, you'd almost forgotten the one comforting element in this house. Salem, your black cat, is looking at you with one eye as he continues to torment your legs and meow persistently. You've been gone too long, and now he's really hungry. He must not have found any mice or birds in the street today. You, on the other hand, have no appetite, so what you do is open a tin of meat and divide it in half, putting one half in the bowl and the other half on a slice of bread. Not that strange for you to eat this way, as your accomplices are short of time and your salary is mostly used to pay the rent. As you chew, you watch Salem swallows the last bite, glances at the window you always leave half open for him, and decides he would rather be with you than go out. He then jumps into your arms and starts making... That's obviously... that's not an English idiom, so I'm guessing it probably is in the language of whoever's made the game. He then jumps into your arms and starts making pasta, which I take to mean that he's kind of kneading his claws like cats do, while the sound of his purring spreads through the air. Let's scratch his ear. You scratch his ear and he begins to tilt his head back in response, as if inviting you to continue. You watch as he bends it down further and further, so much so that you smile at the thought that it might be difficult to continue cuddling him when he falls out of his chair, in the bliss painted on his face. You're left with a mixture of dust, dirt, and what appears to be bits of green paint on your fingers. You sigh and look at it again. Oh, look how dirty you are. Where have you been today? Like all male cats, Salem is a globe-trotter, and cannot help but go out every day to explore, but he always comes home. He's incredibly loyal to you and never fails to show his affection. You feel really exhausted after this day. The second-hand gramophone that you managed to pick up at a bargain price sits on the coffee table, staring at you as if it were inviting you to relax with its music. But no, you don't have the strength to do anything other than throw yourself onto your bed. As you approach the mattress, your strength fails you and you fall back onto it. You feel the blood pounding in your temples like a drum, and you barely manage to grab the sheets and pull them over you. You probably have a fever. That wouldn't be surprising considering what you've been through. Could all this really have been the result of an illness? What if it was a delusion? Or... your head hurts too much. Before you close your eyes, you take one last look at the picture of you and Margaret, and your breathing becomes even harder. You sink your head into the pillow, and try to let go of all these thoughts to finally find peace in sleep. And I think we're going to leave it there. Because it's, I think the video is probably getting on for length, and I don't know how much longer there is in the demo, to be honest. But yeah, I quite enjoyed that. There's it's mostly very, very well written, I think. Very atmospheric, descriptive. And there's a few typos and a few slight awkward phrasings, I think. But as I said, this is only a demo. The game's not out yet. In terms of a release date, it's down just as 2024, so certainly not within the next 3 months or so. So hopefully they've got time to tighten up a bit of the text. But yeah, no, enjoyable. And I can see, so obviously there was the creature that hints at sort of Lovecraftian themes. There's also the name of the main character, Pickman. Lovecraft wrote a story called Pickman's Model. Pickman was an artist, in fact, who... was drawing some very ghoulish, pictures that the character of that story gets fascinated and concerned by. It's a good story, actually, well worth checking out. And there's probably, I've read some Lovecraft. I'm not by any means an expert on his work. So there's probably other little nods to it here and there. I'm guessing some of the characters' names and places, perhaps. But yeah, no, interesting, and hopefully you've enjoyed that too. If you have, if you could hit the thumbs up button, that'd be fantastic. I'll put a link to the Steam store page in the video description, so check it out if you want to have a look yourself. It'd be interesting to know kind of what alternative path we'd have gone down if we'd spoken to Colin, because obviously the bit with our editor became quite lengthy, so there's probably like a whole alternate path there, depending on what we'd chosen. But yeah, very cool. And, if you're watching this and haven't already subscribed to the channel, it'd be great if you could do so. So thanks very much once again, and hope to see you elsewhere on Boring Dad Gaming for other games, other playthroughs. Bye for now.